Ladies and gentlemen, RosterWatch Nation, welcome back to the epic RosterWatch Podcast, brought to you by RosterWatch.com, the all-new RosterWatch.com as of Monday. My name is Alex Dunlap, joined by a man here who you've not heard on the podcast before, but certainly a guy who we've definitely admired. He's at an all-new website himself that you might have known previously as Roto World. It is now NBC Sports Edge. He is John Daigle. You can find him on Twitter at @notjdaigle. You can find his content over there at NBC Sports Edge and also on A Good Football Show. That is the name of his football show there with the crew from NBC Sports Edge, guys like Roto Pat, Denny Carter, a bunch of your favorites. They also have the draft guide over there at NBC Sports Edge right now. You can use the promo code Daigle10 for 10% off discount. Daigle, great to see you, brother. What the hell's going on, man?
Long-time listener, first-time caller, Alex. Glad you invited me on. You reached out, and I was just like when most shows reach out to me. It's like, no, like you don't get excited. I get excited because I listen to your show from afar. I take in a ton of different fantasy content throughout the year, and I think you are one of the few people doing actionable content between February and March. That's your specialty, of course. And so when you join Matt Kelly, when you do your own show and have these reports from Senior Bowl, we talked about this behind the scenes, but I'll say it again for everyone to hear just so they know I'm authentic with it. At Senior Bowl and everything else during the Combine, like you were one of the people I actually go to about player performances and just analysis. So I appreciate your work.
Well, thank you, Daigle. That's it goes both ways, and we all know that you're one of the epic hustlers here in the season-long streets and the DFS streets and everything like that. So the respect is definitely mutual. And we have Byron down right now. I'll be taking off for part of our training camp tour. Byron right now just got his started with the Jaguars, and you bring up actionable stuff. That's what I wanted to talk to you about because you're over there at NBC Sports Edge, previously Roto Wire or Roto World. Mm-hmm. Here's my. But before we even get started, it's like whenever I think about blurbs and news and bits of information from these camps and stuff, I think of Roto World, but it isn't Roto World anymore. Is it? Like I should have asked you if it's okay to even ask this, and if it's not, I'll just edit it out afterwards. It's fine, but. What can you tell us any kind of behind this? Like, why did they change the name? Were they just kind of trying to rebrand or?
Well, NBC Sports Edge is what the name changed to, and it is because of the golden goose that is sports betting. It's like the basket, the pot everyone's trying to dip their hands into, so rebranding then puts us all under the same basket. Like the NBC Sports Edge daily podcast that Sarah Perlman and Drew Dinsick do, two very sharp people, by the way, Monday through Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern, I believe the time is. It's a betting show, strictly a betting show every day. And so just to get us all under one branch, the name change, I guess, had to happen. I'm still on the fence about that, but it did get us all together, and we all discuss things weekly. So, it just moved more towards fantasy and betting as opposed to being in our own little branch and world at Roto World away from the betting spectrum.
That makes
because it's like it's just like the NFL draft. It's just like training camp. Like we're all pretty much using the same information. It's just a matter of how you parse that information. Like how you would bet a game, like a side, is not necessarily how you would use that information to play a lineup in DFS, even though it is the same team and player information. So it's all about just parsing it differently.
Yeah. And that's the thing about, I've watched a lot of your work and this, the shows that you do on Roto Grinders and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. You bring a lot of that kind of sports betting insight to that stuff as well. It all kind of intermingles, and I can understand why.
And it helps that like I always wanted to write and do fantasy football. That was always the goal. But I also out of college, I played poker professionally 2 years, so I understand game theory. And then I came up early in the DFS streets, like at Draft Star and Draft Street, I believe it was, which was the first Jeremy Levine owned product. Now he's just a billionaire with a yacht in Miami and a good friend. But yeah, I came up in the game theory streets. So with betting and handicapping, that's what I did anyhow. So it's nothing new to me.
So if you want if you want the game theory stuff from Daigle, of course, just follow him at @notjdaigle and read his work during the year because there's a lot of it. Game selection, cash games, tournaments, stuff like that for DFS. But for today, Daigle, we want the player takes. We want the player-centric takes, and we want to talk about these team situations, what the hell's going on in training camp. And so like I said earlier, when I think about, actionable stuff, things that actually matter, what matters, what doesn't matter from these training camps, from these bits of news, from these situations, I think about the blurbs you guys write over there at NBC Sports Edge, and who better to have on to go through this. So let's just go division by division. I'm not going to keep you too long, so we'll fire through them. But like I just mentioned the Jaguars, so let's just maybe start AFC South. And when I think of the AFC South, some actionable information that maybe I just could think about is I think some of the stuff that Byron's reporting out of Jaguars camp today is kind of concerning for Travis Etienne. I don't know if you have any takes on that, or if you think that's at all important, but the fact that he hasn't gotten any run with the first team since Byron's been there now on his third day, kind of interesting to me. Also, the fact that Carlos Hyde's getting a lot more run than he would have expected. I think that, we talk about Houston, Jesus, there's storyline after storyline there, all kinds of actionable stuff. Davis Mills throws 5 picks in practice whenever Tyrod misses one.
Mm-hmm.
Like what are we going to do with? What are we going to do with any Texans players, with the Colts? Here, how about this? I'll throw it to you here, Daigle. With the Carson Wentz and the Quentin Nelson stuff now, we've gotten on our text message chain. We've started talking about what we do with Jonathan Taylor. What does all this mean for Jonathan Taylor, for you, and also anything else from the AFC South that sort of sticks out to you as sort of an actual takeaway from some of the news that we've gotten this early?
The injury with Nelson is interesting because, as with all old linemen, but in particular him, he's a tough son of a bitch. Like he may come back in 5 weeks and it may not even matter, but It's still concerning that these odds and uphill battles against Carson Wentz and the Colts offense are beginning to stack. Just in not having their starting left tackle until reportedly mid-October, Carson Wentz is not like if Deshaun Watson, like if everything were cleared, he's traded. Like then we would have to immediately analyze Deshaun Watson with his new offense because he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league on the field. Carson Wentz is not that. He's still a giant question mark. Last year, he was one of the, if not the worst quarterback in the entire NFL. So to just think that even if he returns from injury, he's automatically good. Like it doesn't work like that. There are still so many caveats to parse with this offense. And that's why I'm worried about Jonathan Taylor right now. I have yet to put him inside the top 12 running backs. And so although I luckily fall into this range where he's at now, RB 12 through 15, for me, he's the RB 13. The fact is that, again, all these odds are stacking against him all of a sudden, just in perhaps not having left tackle Nelson and Wentz. Jacob Eason, also these guys, these no names like Jake Eldrenkamp suddenly blocking for him is a major concern. And then we know that Jonathan Taylor, we assume, perhaps not, but we assume that Nyheim Hines is still there for a reason because Hines is very good at the role he plays, the passing down role. And thus, if we were expecting more negative game scripts, that logically takes Taylor off the field. And so that's why I've moved Taylor down. I think it should be a little bit higher on Nyheim Hines, who suddenly his floor is higher now. And so that's where I have moved Taylor from all of this ensuing Colts fallout.
Yeah, I always forget, I constantly have to remind myself that Nyheim Hines had the third most targets of any running back last season, which is just wild when you think back at it. So just I don't want to keep harping on this, man, but just like, since I have you on, I got to get your takes for the people, and I also just want them for my own input here. Are you taking guys like Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Joe Mixon and stuff before you take Jonathan Taylor, or is that a bridge too far?
I already was. Okay. And so again, I may have lucked into the take, but I'm still much higher. I think their breakout potential and their offenses are much stronger. Joe Mixon is just literally a matter of if he's staying healthy, because even the first 6 games last year prior to injury, he led all running backs in overall touches. And his last 3 games when they moved Gio Bernard, who has since joined the Bucs, out of the offense altogether, Joe Mixon quietly averaged 27.5 touches per game over those last 3 games, weeks 4 through 6. So overall, I think he comes back as a workhorse. It's just a matter of like the variables, the injuries that have gotten his way in the past. But I tend to throw out recency bias. I try not to look at that at all into my work. And so, I'm much higher on Mixon. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire, it's interesting. And, we'll probably talk about this when we get to the Chiefs a little bit, but like their offense as a whole is unique, just removing Sammy Watkins and how defenses played them last year. Like this is more on the field talk than opposed to fantasy, but the fallout could be more for fantasy because last year opposing defenses actually ran the most single high safety against them. And that's why in the second half of the season, Tyreek Hill, dropped. He averaged double-digit targets per game from week 8 on because they started moving him around to the slot and both boundary positions all across the field and just allowing him to be who he is and use yards after the catch as opposed to being a deep threat. But if teams just figured out that wasn't successful anyhow, because Tyreek Hill went bonkers, which is also why he's my number 1 receiver over Devontae Adams, which, there's a case for both. No big deal, just nitpicking. Then maybe they just allow them to throw deeper more, and that could be a case for Mecole Hardman. If they don't, maybe that's your case for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who until the Chiefs signed Le'Veon Bell in week 6 last year was the workhorse. Like, he averaged 17 carries and 5 targets per game. They only used him. Everyone just has that bad taste in their mouth still from the heart of the pandemic, Thursday Night Football, season opener, no training camp, nothing to watch at all during the pandemic. And then Clyde Edwards-Helaire and the Chiefs open the season against the Texans. He gets 7 carries inside the 10-yard line. He doesn't score once. And now everyone recency bias. That may be the last time the recreational player saw Clyde Edwards-Helaire actually play on the field. And to them, they just thought, oh, this guy's never going to score a touchdown ever in his life, which is incorrect. So as one of the strongest, as one of the strongest receiving profile backs coming out of college just a year ago, first round draft potential as well, then sure, like I'm still very, very much in over the industry on CEH.
You said a lot of stuff there, but it's like, and we're already onto the Chiefs, but just as long as you said about the Chiefs, just like say what you will about Tyreek Hill, but you're absolutely right. Whenever you look at his splits between the Z, the X, and the slot last year, there's not there truly really isn't a more there are other guys that were levels kind of like his as far as even amount of time at each, but there are very few as guys as well-rounded who can play in so many spots, and that's to credit to him and also to Andy Reid.
And to answer your question about the Texans, just not touching them. We're just not we're not touching anyone. I genuinely think they're going to compete for league records in fewest yards per attempt and points per game this year.
What about the NFC South? I think the obvious 2 places that are most interesting is the quarterback situations in New Orleans and in Carolina, and what those would mean for the ancillary options. I also think it's interesting that it looks like Terrace Marshall has identified a role for himself as sort of like a big slot wide receiver for those guys. Kind of different from what we've seen. He certainly isn't a Curtis Samuel type player. So I'd like to hear your opinion about what's going to happen with the Saints. I mean, if you have any, I'm sure you have takes on everything, but what do you think the quarterback situation is going to be? If you have any hints, and then what does that mean for Kamara and the rest? Is there another breakout? And then maybe anything that you have on Darnold and what we might expect from the wide receivers there in Carolina.
Yeah, I have 2 quick notes on teams. To your point, Terrace Marshall, remember, first-round grade, only got bumped down draft boards for medical red flags, but joins a playbook under OC Joe Brady, who he's all too familiar with from LSU. And most importantly, what I look for is these rookie wide receivers is, were you successful in one position? Because then a team may not use you at that position. That's a totally different way to play in the NFL. But Marshall, again, as you would know, played from the boundary, 73% of his routes in 2019, and the slot, 73% of his routes in 2020. So he's familiar with the offense. He's ready to go and has been successful at every single position, no matter what. Also, like Robbie Anderson had an illness for a few days, and that allowed Marshall to move into 2 wide sets across from DJ Moore. And that's when coaches really started noticing. And like then he came into the slot, and it's not even a competition as we expect against David Moore, who David Moore is a great deep threat, but he's not first round potential like Terrace Marshall. And so, yeah, there's a legitimate outlook that Marshall could lead this team in receiving touchdowns, because last year that's where they struggled inside the red zone with Teddy Bridgewater. And I honestly think it's just because they didn't have enough size, and Marshall just he towers over both Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore. So yeah, that offense I'm very high on, especially because the Panthers in hindsight faced the league's toughest schedule of opposing pass defenses last year, and yet Brady still engineered and coordinated Teddy Bridgewater to a career high in passing yards. And so I'm still high on Sam Darnold, even though I understand in like everyone's prospect models, even the past 2 years, even under Adam Gase, he hasn't shown really that much potential. I still think he flashed though as a rookie his very first year. For the Saints though, as you mentioned, all word out of camp is that Jameis Winston is winning the battle. My concern still is that Taysom Hill, what he does still, his strength would be used inside the 10-yard line, thus still rendering Jameis Winston like a low-end QB2, whether he's used between the 20s or not. The competition I keep looking at is Marquez Callaway versus Traquan Smith, because like there's a clear opening there with Michael Thomas probably going on the PUP list and not returning until week 8, since the Saints bye is in week 6. So he'd have to miss 6 games, including the one after the bye. And then Deontay Harris, who would be in the slot usually, is facing a pending DUI charges, which would at least sit him for 2 games. So we don't know what's going to happen there yet. Marquez Callaway was pretty good. And the few times, 4 games, he played over 50% of the team snaps last year. And just the fact he's much cheaper now than Traquan Smith, who has yet to break out, even though we know his measurables and profile is a really good one, and maybe just didn't mesh with Drew Brees, whereas perhaps it would with Jameis Winston, is still going higher. And I'm just taking the discount on Marquez Callaway. Do you, though, know anything about Jalen McCleskey? Because he apparently is doing well at camp. But like he's
where's he from? I might have something, but I'd have to.
He was in the American Conference in 2019. He went undrafted last year and puttered around on the Giants practice squad. But Nick Underhill, who's pretty locked in, is saying that McCleskey is the one who's sort of emerging as a wide receiver 3 or 4 option.
I have no idea who this guy is.
Okay. I didn't either.
He's kind of small. I'm looking at some photos from practice, but I guess I got to look into Jay. It's very, very rare, Daigle. A guy comes onto my show and stumps me on a player in the NFL. I don't know.
I know he had 4 years like lukewarm production in the Big 12, but then transferred to the American Conference with, God, I can't remember is it Tulane? I can't remember which college it was. But either way, like he didn't really break out ever. Like he was a 5th-year guy. So it's just odd that Underhill spoke about him. And then I went to research him, and it's like no one has anything on him. It's like we've never heard of him.
Yeah, I'll go through here and later on and check his rivals and stuff like that, and see if I can figure anything out on the dude. But yeah, nothing on that dude. Cool. So that's the NFC South. Let's go north, I guess. What AFC North? I think probably. I haven't gotten anything actionable from the Ravens. Have you? I don't know. Like, and also this Joe Burrow, or if there's something that you already had in mind, that's fine. I kind of also wonder about this Joe Burrow stuff. If there's anything to it, the fact that they say that he's not looking quite like himself thus far in practice.
It is still very early, so I don't put too much thought into the Joe Burrow and the offense just struggling right now. It is concerning, I guess, a little bit, though, that it's what we thought. He is struggling to step up into the pocket from that injury, basically PTSD, which is what I worried about with Dak as well. But Dak reportedly looked great before he got re-injured. Not the same injury. So I wouldn't put too much thought into it just yet. Still very high on the Bengals passing volume. And we know like they're going to be a bad team. The Bengals just are not a good organization as a whole. They're 6-25-1 under Zach Taylor, and fans and anyone else don't care. It's just like, yeah, sure. Just let him keep coaching. Who cares? So I'm not concerned just yet. I'm still very high on Bengals double stacks and best ball and redraft. We'll see what happens if the offense continues to struggle in training camp. For me, the takeaway for the Ravens, as you said about Lamar Jackson, it's actually kind of concerning that he clearly refuses to get vaccinated because – and he didn't say anything about it, but the fact he's out 10 days and he's spoken out publicly against it in the past tells us that, okay, because protocol in the NFL now is that if you are vaccinated, you are only out 48 hours with 2 negative tests 24 hours apart. If you are unvaccinated, you're automatically out 10 days no matter what. The fact that Lamar Jackson is out 10 days tells us he's not vaccinated. Also, apparently overnight Tuesday, he put some anti-vaccine propaganda on his IG and immediately deleted it because he probably immediately felt the repercussions in his mentions. And so just the fact that, he could test positive even for close contact on a Saturday and then be out the next 2 games for the Ravens, that's a big deal because like Lamar Jackson's my QB2. I have live MVP bets on him because the discount from last year is being baked in incorrectly. Like last year was the time you should have faded the Ravens given his 9% touchdown rate, knowing that's going to naturally regress. And he did finish 10th overall in fantasy points per game. But this year is the year to take advantage of that discount. And that's why I've been extremely high on him and the entire offense, who remember clicked over their last 6 games as well from the Cowboys game on. And now just the fact that perhaps Lamar could miss 10 days multiple times throughout the year is concerning, and maybe we should start baking that into our process, as crazy as that sounds.
Jalen McCleskey was a 3-star, 153-pound, pint size, little fit 5'9", 153 to Oklahoma State. who it's like and so that was during the same time as like the Chris Lacey's of the world, and the top. That was 2015, so that was the year before Tylan Wallace, and they had some good Marcel Aitman. They had some good wide receivers there during that time. That's probably why I had no. He might not have gotten on the field. You said he eventually transferred. I can't believe we're talking about Jalen McCleskey here on the podcast.
You wanted the training camp blurbs. I'm giving you one.
Perfect. I know it's fantastic. All right. What about NFC North? What's actionable? It doesn't look like Justin Fields is probably going to get his first start at the LA Rams. It seems like Andy Dalton's and the other not Alvin Kamara, Tariq Cohen is still out. So what does that mean for you with David Montgomery? And then of course anything else, like there's a million things you could. I'm sure you'd like to talk about. There's a million things I'm sure you could talk about between all these teams. So I don't want to lead you to the Bears, but I would like to hear your thoughts. Your thoughts maybe on David Montgomery, if you like him, because I thought he was going to come into this season really overvalued based on how he finished last year. Doesn't feel like people are. It doesn't feel like people are just taking this massive hands off or really hands on approach to him. He feels to me like he's priced pretty fairly considering the stuff with Tariq Cohen. So anything on that or in any of these other NFC North teams?
Montgomery is a double-edged sword because he showed what we like from our running backs, that in the middle range, he has a ceiling. Like he was a monster over the last 5 games, over his last 5 starts last year. Having said that, he was able to break out because the pass-catching back Tariq Cohen wasn't available. The news, to your point, is that Cohen is week to week rather than day to day as he rehabs from that torn ACL, which is a bad sign. The thing is, though, is that they signed Damian Williams. So there's now suddenly a roadblock that didn't exist last year to Montgomery's pass-catching routes. Without Cohen, he averaged 28 routes per game over that last stretch of the season. But with Cohen available in those first 5 games, he averaged only 20 routes and wasn't really targeted that much because he wasn't the passing game option. So now if we assume that Damian Williams opens the year as the passing game option, that obviously restricts Montgomery's ceiling. Having said that, his ADP right now around RB 22, 23, it really it's not egregious. It's fine. Like if you're drafting if you're drafting running backs in that range, it's nothing to fade or be angry against because he has shown that he can have a ceiling. Although I will say reports at a camper that Damian Williams hasn't lost a step in opting out last year and just looks just as great as he did with the Chiefs in the pass catching role in particular. So that kind of tells us that Montgomery likely won't open the year with that ceiling potential that he exploded for last year. Also in the NFC North, the big news is that Aaron Rodgers, of course, is back. And so no longer ADP is depressed. Aaron Jones, just 3 weeks ago, you could have gotten in the middle of the second round, whereas now he's arguably a top 5 running back. I have him as my RB6 overall and was taking all of the dips just because in Jamal Williams exiting the offense and vacating 35 targets, 14 routes per game, that doesn't seem, could be wrong, but that doesn't seem like it'd ever go to A.J. Dillon, who has just 23 catches going back to Boston College total. He has never profiled as a receiving back, just a bruising back, and the potential is salivating, I know, but the fact that he was going to step in and take Jamal Williams' role always seemed like incorrect analysis. And so I was always higher on a ceiling outlook for Jones, even higher than last year. But Devontae Adams is the interesting one because now rather than being the wide receiver 4 or 5 behind Stephon Diggs and DeAndre Hopkins, you can easily jam him in there as the wide receiver 1 or 2. And at the number 3 overall draft spot, if you're not an FFPC and going Travis Kelce, for instance, Adams has an argument because his floor is arguably higher than any running back you'd take there. Zeke, Kamara, just the fact that Adams has averaged 11.3 targets per game and 25 full games with Aaron Rodgers going all the way back to week 9 of the 2019 season. Remember when he returned from injury? That's the floor you get. You get double-digit targets every single week with Adams. Even if you look back at the NFC divisional round, I believe it was, against the Rams. Everyone cites the wide receiver cornerback matchups, but Adams and Rodgers are so good together that Ramsey matchup didn't even matter. They got inside the 10, they picked Ramsey, Adams still scores. And what would be a bad outing for Adams, I believe he had 64 yards and a touchdown, was still a great outing. That's just fine because the floor is still so high for him. So he makes a legitimate argument as your number 3 or 4 overall pick now that Rodgers is back.
they get down close to the goal line and they just practice the shit out of that whip route and those things.
They're so good at it.
Yeah, like it's almost like he's like their goal line back.
It's like crazy. And maybe the margin between them gets a lot closer this year because Adam Thielen overall did lead the league in end zone targets and converting those end zone targets into touchdown. But like Adam Thielen was used inside the 10 for a reason because him and Kirk Cousins were just so good together inside the 10. Like they didn't even use Justin Jefferson really in that spot because Adam Thielen knows how to play that route. And so again, maybe Justin Jefferson, who's obviously like one of the best receivers in the entire NFL all of a sudden, gets closer in that range. But like they use Thielen in that range because he's very good at it.
Right. So, hey, look, we managed to fit in another NFC North.
There you go. Accidentally.
All right. So let's get to the let's go to the AFC East, and I'd like to hear what you have. But I guess to me, when I think about it, there's a lot of intrigue there. I mean, it's like Tua looks like he's, it feels like some of the reports were rough at first, but feel like they're getting better. Been better. But I mean, for me, it's mainly just this stuff of Mac Jones, how long till he takes over, because it feels like Cam is going to start out this season as the starter. If you can look at what Belichick has to say for now. Do you have any thoughts about Mac Jones and Cam, and then just anything else that you have going on in the AFC East that you're monitoring closely and find actionable?
The biggest one right now is that Elijah Moore is basically paying the Roto World bills for us because every day is a new Elijah Moore blurb. So much though, like Connor Hughes, one of the locked in Jets beat writers, says he goes to Jets practices trying to focus on anyone else, but Elijah Moore prevents that because like he just forces you to watch him. He opened the team on the second string and now has already surged to the first team offense, competing with Keelan Cole on the outside. And it's funny because, like Elijah Moore broke out at the age of 19 at his best season at that age. Also, left the usurped A.J. Brown's school record for receptions in a year for 86 in his final season at Ole Miss as well, but was only used out wide throughout his college career on 8.4% of his snaps, 147 total snaps. But the fact he's already competing to start on the outside with the Jets and he excelled in the slot, like it tells you that he's going to be on the field all the time and that he has the athletic traits to excel no matter where they put him, and they recognize it. That's the most important part here, is that Robert Saleh already sees we're going to use this guy everywhere. And so just the fact that as a rookie explosive wideout with a deep threat quarterback, for whatever we think of Zach Wilson, I am done trying to evaluate quarterbacks in the NFL transitioning because like we just get it wrong so often. It's an impossible thing to do, whether you're in fantasy football, whether you're part of a front office. No one does it right. No one gets it right. So we know Wilson's traits. How about we just bank on that arm with Elijah Moore and see what they can do together? So it seems like he's going to make an immediate impact even in redraft leagues as like an option in your 8th or 9th round.
Do you like, just out of curiosity, I don't want to take it to another division, but do you like at the very end of drafts there, do you like Rondale Moore or Elijah Moore as a guy to take a flyer on between the Moores? Because I had a lot of trouble between those guys pre-draft. I had them ranked 3 and 4. I had a hard time deciding which one I liked better as prospects, and now we're getting to a spot where I'm having a hard time deciding which one I like better as far as their actual fantasy prospects this season.
If Rondale Moore had been impressive the last 2 years, I would say Rondale Moore because I'm still banking on 2018 essentially for him.
It's hard to forget. It's hard to forget.
Yeah. And as you know, like it's hard to explain to other people, but like everyone sees him. It's like, look at this 5'7" little chump. But it's like, dude, do you know when he goes in the gym, he still like squats 650 and like deadlifts 550. And he's more athletic than any NFL cornerback who's going to cover him.
He told us that if he wasn't playing football, he'd be a fucking acrobat.
Yeah.
that's the kind of weirdo he is, man. He's built differently, man. He's built differently.
Rondale Moore, I'm actually higher on Rondale Moore than Rashad Bateman in both best ball and redraft. Having said that, Elijah Moore is still the highest, just knowing that he's immediately going to play, whereas we don't know with Moore because AJ Green, it sounds like, is going to start in 2 wide sets for whatever we think about that. And then Christian Kirk is mysteriously absent from every practice. We don't know when he's going to return. And then we have to see what else happens with Rondale Moore and Larry Fitzgerald.
Fair enough. All right. It just any quick take on the Cam Newton stuff. Do you think he'll be quarterback for week 1? And do you think that'll stick?
I genuinely don't know. The concern with Mac Jones, who I'm still drafting as my QB 3 or 4 in Superflex leagues, is that they would still bring Cam Newton in as a battering ram inside the 10. Literally 50% of his fantasy production last year was on the ground. Like, it wasn't through the air. He threw 8 touchdowns. They won 7 games impressively with him throwing only 8 touchdowns, but like all of his fantasy production came on the ground. And just the fact that that's his strength, it makes sense that they would use him as that, which would then lower Mac Jones and, more importantly, Damian Harris' ceiling. Because if we just said Cam Newton doesn't play a snap at all, I genuinely think Damian Harris has 15 touchdown upside, because like he's the only guy there that would play that role, especially since we still consider Sony Michel to be cut on the final day of training camp cuts.
All right, so NFC East, I feel like it's actionable just to say that CeeDee Lamb looks like he's over, just from the looks of it. And I said it I said it to a lot of hate from even Dallas fans last year. I'm like, why do you guys hate me for saying that CeeDee Lamb comes in here? He's already your best wide receiver the minute he steps in the building. People thought I was ridiculous. Said people, the Dallas fans come at me. I'm like, well, what he's like, I'm talking up your own guy. That's like you're taking this as me saying Amari sucks. It's not. This is me saying CeeDee's awesome. Do you think that at this point though he could be being overdrafted? I saw him go in the second round of a draft that I was in just 2 nights ago, and I felt like it was a little bit steep for me.
I was in the puppy, the $5 underdog draft that I'm trying to just jam in because I didn't even get to play the puppy one. It filled so quickly. And CeeDee Lamb is going at the first, second round turn all of a sudden. And that's a little too rich for me, even though I do want shares. If that's the case, I continue just drafting and buying the dip on Amari Cooper, who has still averaged like a team high 23% target share in the games he's played with Dak Prescott since being traded. Last year, under Kellen Moore, averaged 18 fantasy points per game as the team's number 1 receiver. I will say, though, the ceiling is clearly there, not just from being CeeDee Lamb as a whole and profiling as an amazing player, but also last year, he was outsnapped in games because they exclusively played him in the slot, 93% of his routes from the slot. Whereas this year, in the spring and OTAs and in training camp, and Kellen Moore has even acknowledged they are using him all over the field. So it seems like he's not coming off, and Michael Gallup will be the odd man out, strictly playing from the boundary. Gallup played 93% of his routes from the boundary last year. I don't expect that to change, seeing he actually is a very good deep threat. Everyone gets mad at Gallup, by the way, because the targets are volatile, but that's what happens when you're strictly maybe he's not strictly a deep guy, but when you are a deep player, you need volume. Otherwise, it's going to be like Kenny Golladay, whereas your production week to week is volatile. Having said that, yeah, CeeDee Lamb, I think he's going to be on the field every one. So while he is maybe being slightly overdrafted, the past 2 weeks, he is going 5 spots ahead of Amari Cooper. I'm just fine getting both and then making Dak Prescott also buying the dip as the QB 4 or 5 overall and just double stacking them right now because I don't really worry about Dak's injuries this early into the preseason.
Yeah, I will say I would generally be with you about no Michael Gallup in the slot, but I did see him taking some reps out of the slot on NFL Network earlier today. So like maybe they're trying to, I don't know. Maybe
they were doing it in OTAs actually too. I just didn't buy it. But hey, if they're gonna move Gallup around too, like I would love it because also. Honestly, after this year as an organization, now it's the Cowboys. They're probably going to do it wrong, but you should shift them. You should move on from Cooper because the contract allows you to, and shift that money to Michael Gallup and bringing him back. But again, it's the Cowboys. They're probably not going to do that.
No, you like Jerry's going to get rid, right? ship Amari down the river and keep Gallup. Come on. All right, so the West. All right, so AFC West. Actionable information. We already talked a little bit about the Chiefs. You can whatever you got, but I mean, I would like to hear what you have to say about maybe Denver, because it looks like Melvin Gordon, we'd written him off, but apparently he's still running ahead of Javonte Williams. And there's also the stuff with, Courtland Sutton. He hasn't been looking very good. Jerry Jeudy, on the other hand, has been looking better than ever. We've sort of had the talk on the Sirius XM show that maybe Drew Lock would be the better quarterback for Courtland Sutton and Teddy Bridgewater may be the better quarterback for Jerry Jeudy, just because stylistically those two quarterbacks stylistically sort of profile as the type that are, Locke has the bigger arm. He'll push it downfield to get it to the big alpha X wide receiver. Whereas Teddy Bridgewater, he's not a technician or anything like that, but he's been fairly accurate. And you got a separator like Jerry Jeudy. It feels like that would be more of a boon for Jeudy. Do you have any takes on the Broncos offense, sort of what you expect and how you see it, and then anything else you have about the AFC West?
Well, the issue for Locke is that we know top 5 deep ball rate, 20-plus yards down the field last year, but it's still Drew Lock. And the same thing he struggled with in Missouri is the same thing he struggled with in the league. And he's just a second-round pick. I don't understand why they don't just move on, but they feel tied to him for some reason. But either way, like that is why Courtland Sutton, in his 6 full games with Drew Lock, has only finished 1 game inside the top 38 receivers because like Lock just is not accurate downfield. Finished outside the top 30 in deep ball.
Hold on. What did you say on the out of that? That's a great stat. What was that?
Courtland Sutton has played 6 full games with Drew Lock. He has finished inside the top 38 wide receivers just once.
Top 38. That's horrible.
Yeah, and that happened to be the Drew Lock's debut game against the Chargers. Remember that like they weren't even going to win until Drew Lock launched the ball at him in the last few seconds, and then Courtland Sutton drew a DPI, and then they just went down and kicked the field goal to win the game. But overall, yeah, like Courtland Sutton's strengths and Drew Lock, although you think they would mesh, Lock finished outside the top 30 in deep ball accuracy. Thus, they don't mesh at all. So like those deep balls and those empty air yards, I call them prayer yards, they just don't matter. They don't amount to anything. Whereas Jerry Jeudy earned 112 targets as a immediate separator in the NFL last year. And I understand that he had 12 drops, but we don't worry about drops because, again, he earned those targets. Like, especially as someone with soft hands from college, we expect the drops issue to just go away. No big deal. So if we get Teddy Bridgewater in center, it's great because the Broncos sneakily have the league's easiest projected schedule of opposing pass defenses. And I know a lot of people don't like that stat because they just say, oh, so much changes in the NFL. But I love to use the weighted teams in that stat because that at least tells us they're going to have an easy time of opposing pass defenses. Doesn't have to be the easiest, but it tells us it's going to be easy. And so as long as we get a player who completes passes like Bridgewater and not one that doesn't, like Drew Lock, it's pretty good for Jeudy and company. So that's why I'm hoping for Bridgewater.
I'm sorry. I was just going to ask you about the running backs, if there's anything you can take away from that news.
I think, well, it does sound like Melvin Gordon's going to stick on the roster. Benjamin Albright, who's, at every single practice, pretty locked into Broncos news, even sounds like, no, like Melvin Gordon's clearly the starter on this offense. The thing is, I would still expect Javonte Williams to be the better back and starting by the end of the year. So I would still be buying the dip on Javonte Williams. I have been treating Javonte Williams as my RB2 when I have an anchor or hero RB start, whatever the hell everyone wants to call it. Because like we don't care about Javonte Williams' weekly floor as long as we have like a Christian McCaffrey or Dalvin Cook making up for that production every single week. We can wait and just take like a Tony Pollard, a Javonte Williams, guys who we don't expect to get their production weekly at all and hope their ceilings just explode at the end of the year if something happens to the starter ahead of them. And so that's how I'm treating it. Not necessarily you have to bend over backwards to get Melvin Gordon, but so much like maybe take him into account a little bit more, raise your rankings a bit, and then also buy the dip on Javonte Williams as a late season starter.
My two favorite guys from Broncos camp. It's like the devil on each shoulder with Ben Albright over here and Cecil Lammey over here, and like Ben.
Cecil's good too. Yeah,
you've been saying, hey, Melvin Gordon start, and Cecil saying take Javonte Williams in the 4th round of your fantasy drafts, and you're just like, it's crazy, man. But I think that you laid out the dichotomy really well. I think if you're going to be taking the Javonte Williams side of it, you might need to wait a little while. But I think eventually he's going to usurp Melvin Gordon. They didn't draft that guy for no reason.
Right. And one other quick one is on Mecole Hardman because he is definitively the team's number 2 out of camp. He's staying after practice, working with Andy Reid individually. He's working with Patrick Mahomes individually. The thing is, I don't know if he's overvalued or undervalued. He's definitely like a tier breaker, someone we could see with a wide receiver 2 potential with Mahomes especially. But like, remember last year, it wasn't about opportunity. Like the fact he's now the number 2 doesn't matter at all. It really just comes down to, has he learned to play wide receiver in the NFL? And I don't know yet. That's why I think it's fine buying shares. But also if you're fading him, that's okay too, because we don't know. He played 6 games without Sammy Watkins last year, and he actually averaged 1 fewer target per game, only the similar amount of fantasy points, 7.5 points per game, just literally wasn't good enough. So much so that they allowed Byron Pringle to run more routes in the postseason than Mecole Hardman. So the fact that Mecole Hardman's the number 2, I don't know if it means much. It's just a matter of he's going to be on the field and hopefully he's better. Because remember, converted cornerback, only played slot receivers last 2 years at Georgia. We'll have to see if an offseason and training camp actually help him. And maybe it does. I
would have liked it better if he would have sought out Patrick Mahomes once during this offseason for a private workout together, which is something that the people around there saying that he didn't do. But so that's one side. But the other side is like, Jesus, man, you give me 6.5 targets a game for Mecole Hardman with what he can do with the ball in his hands. It's just you get him in the 11th or 12th round, and that's just Yahtzee.
Absolutely. He is the breaker. Like he is the one that's going to make you cry if you're fading, but also like you could be right if you're fading him. It's a double-edged sword.
All right. So he is John Daigle. Daigle. It is at not J Daigle on Twitter. Before we talk one last division here, NFC West, tell the people where they can find you. Tell them what all you guys have going on over there, the podcast, everything like that.
Yeah, it's at not J Daigle on Twitter, which is still the worst handle ever, but I made my bed in 2009 and now we stick with it. A Good Football Show on iTunes is where we talk. We're about to ramp up to 5 episodes per week, so go ahead and subscribe there. And then, of course, if you go to NBCSportsEdge.com, our online draft guide that's continuing to update daily for any pressing news is available, and you can use the promo code Daigle10 to get a discount as well. So go ahead and lock into that if you're in the redraft streets.
Perfect. All right, Daigle. So I guess for the last thing with the NFC West, we talked a little bit about Rondale Moore, who's always at the front of the front of my mind. I guess there's the Seahawks stuff where they might be, Shane Waldron talking about how he's speeding things up a little bit. If we can get back to letting Russ cook like he was to start last season, that sure would be awesome. But to me, and again, anything you got, I would love to hear it, but I've certainly wouldn't want to get you out of here without hearing your take on the Rams backfield. What you think of Darrell Henderson, if you think that there's any sort of threat from any sort of lingering free agent signing, or, whether Xavier Jones or Jake Funk or any of these guys, those guys are mixing in with the ones right now, according to Jordan Rodriguez. We don't know exactly why or, if that would continue. Do you believe in Darrell Henderson, and how do you see this whole running game shaking out in the midst of the massive Cam Akers fallout?
Henderson was one of my favorite players coming out of Memphis. Just an absolute stud and so much fun to watch. And I understand his rookie year struggled in the zone run concept since he's just a straight line dude. And that's why he struggled to find and have vision and find the gap as well. Last year it clicked, whereas he was the workhorse for a little bit because Cam Akers won the job, started the year as a starter, had that high ankle sprain, disappeared. Weeks 2 through 11, Henderson took over. He suffered a high ankle sprain. And then from that point forward, Akers broke out and we saw what happened. But Henderson, Sean McVay keeps mentioning this mysterious injury, and more importantly, that they just want to keep him healthy. They just want to preserve him since he's basically been injured the past 2 years or struggled in that concept, like I said earlier. So I don't know if he's going to be a workhorse, but I do think we are either too high or too low on him, and I'm not sure which one. I have him settled at RB21 right now, right behind Montgomery, but maybe there's a case he should be ahead of Chris Carson. Maybe he should be just behind Najee Harris or JT as the RB 14 or 15, because if they do lean on him, that's what this entails. The Rams have the easiest projected schedule of opposing rush defenses, and we know that just having Stafford under center as opposed to Jared Goff, they're going to be able to use every single inch of that turf at SoFi Field. It's going to be an amazing offense, probably be tops and yards per play. And so, yeah, that's why I'm trying to buy into Henderson. But again, for redraft, we just don't know if the third round is too high or too low. I want to lean the former or the latter. I think he could be a workhorse with his offense, and I don't want to think about Xavier Jones and Jake Funk being players that are actually going to make an impact when it comes to Darrell Henderson, who they previously traded up for before nixing the idea of that and trading up again for Cam Akers the following year. So I'm going to probably be all in on Darrell Henderson in the high-stakes streets once we get to Vegas in early September, and everyone's trying to decide and declare and overdraft players depending on where we have them. And yeah, that's how I lean right now on him. But the other pressing news from the division is that Trey Lance, of course, and the perpetual liar that Kyle Shanahan is not getting first-team reps. Shanahan, of course, said there's no plans to get Lance reps with the first team after he blazes and just out-betters and outperforms Jimmy Garoppolo. And then literally 24 hours later at the next practice, put Lance on the field for first-string reps. Mm-hmm. The way it's going, it's sounding as if they cannot help themselves. And more importantly, Lance is forcing the issue, which was always the record, or always the problem here, that no matter what, they'll just bench Garoppolo's $23 million and call it a day and move on to Lance immediately. And if that's the case, then for best ball, it's easy. You draft an early quarterback, with especially let's say Lamar Jackson with a late bye, and Trey Lance's week 6 bye for San Francisco doesn't really matter because you have this guy who's probably going to be starting him in best ball scoring every single week anyhow, and 2 quarterback builds. For redraft, it becomes an issue because, as we know, it's smarter to play the late round game and not worry at quarterback and just wait. But if that's the case with Trey Lance, you don't want to do that in redraft because, like, even when he starts, perhaps he's not starting over a guy like Lamar Jackson or Dak or Kyler Murray. What I do, how I approach him, is I draft him late because everyone is concerned about him starting, of course. And then you draft either Sam Darnold or Kirk Cousins just because of what their schedule allows for. For instance, for the Panthers, I'm trying to remember this exactly. I don't have it pulled up. Here we go. Panthers, their first 6 games. Remember, 49ers by week 6. So we need Lance to start by week 7, but no one's going to draft Sam Darnold. You add him in the last round, and the Panthers play the Jets, Saints, Texans, Cowboys, Eagles, and Vikings in those first 6 games. Terrific matchup for Sam Darnold, who you can just stash and then drop until Lance starts as a potential QB1. Also for the Vikings, for Kirk Cousins, the Vikings open with the Bengals, Cardinals, Seahawks, Browns, Lions, and Panthers in those first 6 games. So I'm playing matchups with late-round quarterbacks, and then I'm getting Lance, who, again, does have top 12 potential with the rushing upside the moment he starts.